Welcome to another episode of Otherworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. Brian, how you doing today, bud?
You're doing good, man.
Excellent. All right, so just for our listeners out there, our episode that we were wanting to have today with our pilot friend fell through. He just had a lot of stuff going on and wasn't able to make it. So we've got our buddy Adam here tonight. Adam, how you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you very much for the invitation. I know that we've been discussing this for quite some time, so it's good to finally be in the chair.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you. So this is just kind of be a free flow conversation tonight. We're just going to talk about maybe some paranormal stuff and maybe dive into some alien stuff. But before we get into that, what is our weapons of choice tonight?
Well, I've got a Blue Moon open that's got about half left, and I got a garage beer sitting in front of me to crack after that one.
That's horseshit. What you got tonight there, bud?
So starting off with an ice cold Bud Light. That's typically my beverage of choice. Light is right as I've gotten into my older age, but I've got a garage beer in the queue here. So
sweet. So I'm going to do the old Voodoo Ranger Juicy Haze IPA tonight.
Swanky.
I guess I'm the only one that's going to be opening the beer right now since you all are already getting into it. So we'll I'll just get the crack in there for everybody. All right. So how do you want to start this tonight? We wanted to, Adam, do you have anything you want to chat about right off the get-go?
Sure. Yeah. So, as I've told you in previous conversations, a huge paranormal guy. I probably would say 85% of the podcasts that I consume have some type of paranormal or Sasquatch nexus to them. So definitely something of interest. Kind of as I've aged, and I found a podcast when I was overseas a few years ago called Monsters Among Us, and so that is definitely my kind of podcast of choice when I'm out mowing, when out trimming, things like that. So Patreon supporter of theirs, so it's definitely been a good podcast to hear other people's examples of pretty much anything. The left and right limits are pretty wide. So, anything from Sasquatch to ghosts to mirrored men. If you're not familiar with those, we can touch a little bit on the mirrored men phenomenon. And then also, they get into angels and guardian angels and omens, banshees, if you're familiar with banshees. Obviously, the Irish heritage that I have. There's a significant amount of paranormal information and lore that is associated with Ireland itself and kind of the Irish culture. So, they're definitely a wide breadth of information.
I've heard a lot of information about UFOs historically through like paintings, Roman times, where you see a wheel on fire and then they're trying to corroborate whether those things are actually what we would envision as UFOs, or at the time, if that's what they were envisioning as, like to your point, angels.
Yeah, and that's documented. And what is so, interesting about those kind of those ancient civilizations are, even though these cultures around the globe, geographically dispersed, the cave paint, and different artifacts that we do find, the representation is very similar across the board. So you could have, Mesopotamian art and cultural significant items and artifacts that are extremely similar to the ancient peoples in South America or in Asia. So, that's certainly one of
the telling, right?
It's one of the leading, kind of one of the leading, the way they're like, hey, if these are consistent across the board, it's impossible for the people to be able to, because of the geographic dispersion. So.
Yeah, and we're always talking about ways like, how do you corroborate things? Like, that's what we've covered in a lot of our podcasts up till now. Episode 1 was Bob Lazar, and then the last 3 we've talked about kind of pilots and then the governmental research into that, and what does that help corroborate without evidence, something we can physically put our hands on, everything's just a story. So like, give me something that I can put my hands on or point to multiple places and say, yeah, this helps lead credence to whatever the story may be.
And there's another thing that we talked about as well is, and at least I brought it up is, you look at some of the paintings that depict alien, extraterrestrial, and then obviously the technologies that they had at the time that even to this day, we don't really know how they did X, Y, and Z. And it just begs the question, I mean, are we the dumb ones? What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, one of kind of the in vogue theories right now is the simulation theory. And as we are progressing and as technology is gaining speed, the idea of or the theory of kind of simulation or living in that is, gaining momentum, obviously. And so, as we see these different type of cave arts or different artifacts, and they're representing similar things, I think that is certainly, coming to a head, and maybe understanding that there's multiple iterations. There's kind of the time slips and that continuum, being able to bounce in and out of various dimensions. That's something that could be used to be able to explain a lot of the things that they're seeing and they're discovering.
So you mentioned the simulation theory. For our listeners out there that may have never heard that before, are you able to like kind of break it down Barney style, just kind of give a brief explanation, like really what it means?
Yeah, and again, I'm certainly not a leading authority or any type of authority on it, but essentially it's just saying that we there's a the world that we see and the world that we're living is basically set up to play out in a certain way, and that our ancient ancestors and even a race of people or individuals that might have inhabited either originating on the earth or somewhere else have kind of put into play. It's very similar to like a Matrix, if you've seen the movie. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of everything that we're seeing is just being played out, and we are just kind of vessels that we can go back and do it over.
So it's kind of like deja vu, because the theory behind that, from my understanding, deja vu, it's kind of like when you have deja vu, it's like you're in that moment where you're supposed to be at that time, and so that kind of like plays along with that. But it also kind of goes into your question that you have: what are we, a zoo?
Yeah, farm, lab, or zoo.
Farm, lab, or zoo, right?
I think we're one of the three.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of parallels at least with what he just described. So what do you think? Do you think we're a farm, zoo, or an experiment?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those questions that you can just spend a lot of time out in a garage drinking a garage beer, thinking about. It's tough because if you do have any type of like a religious affiliation or religious background, or you do have faith in your life, you understand the concept of a soul, and I've heard it kind of played multiple ways where we are just essentially our bodies are a mode of kind of a mode of transportation throughout this world.
I've heard the same thing.
And then it's our soul that is really what kind of lives on and then can be in and out. And I think you see this too. You have the Eastern traditions of reincarnation, and then you see when children are younger and they're maybe a little bit more close to the veil than some. As you age, they say you get away from the veil, right? And so that's when the kid, smaller kids can
you get desensitized.
So younger kids they can see ghosts or they can talk to spirits and things of that nature. But speaking about reincarnation itself, you see kids that have incredible memories and stories of things that they would never have.
Like a past life.
They've never, exactly. So they've never been exposed to it. They've never had anybody show them any photographs. And I was actually just thinking, or I was just, I heard a story about like a 9/11 child who her dad passed on 9/11 in one of the Twin Towers as a fireman. And she is like, a few years after, she's talking about how funny her dad is, and she can see him, and they're telling them jokes, and she's with these other individuals as well as her dad that she can see, and she has names for them. She has these very like Uncle so and so, or hey, that's fireman so and so. And she's describing these things to her mom, and she nailed all of the nicknames that they would call. So it's not like she knew the proper name. She knew him as like, we'll say like Fitz, like my last name. And she's like, hey, Daddy's with Fitz, and they keep telling me these knock jokes, and they're really nice, and she's saying all these names, and the mom is just floored because she's never been exposed. She was young when he passed, and she's never been exposed to anything like that.
Man, that gives me cold chills just like hearing that story. But there's like to that point, I remember I read something. It was a story along the same lines where this mom and daughter were driving down this road, and the girl from the back seat is like, "Mommy, please stop at this stop sign." Basically, and she stopped, and she's like, well, why didn't you think I was going to stop the stop sign? She's like, well, the last time you didn't stop, we both died. And it was just like this weird, like reincarnation, like they're reliving their life, but they were driving down this road at some point in their life, and and they both got killed in this car crash. So it was just crazy shit like that. Man, that's something like it's like, we got kids, right? And when they're young, we tend to think that they just say some really silly stuff. But if you really listen, is it really silly? I mean, they might be actually seeing some stuff.
Mm-hmm. And some of the ones that you mentioned, like Goosebumps, but there's been ones that like the kids will, they'll talk about military service at like a really young age. And I remember one, he was talking about being a pilot. He's like, yeah, I used to be a pilot. I used to fly this aircraft. And he could tell, this child of 3 years old could tell exactly what the aircraft was. It was a 1940s era, World War II era aircraft. Said, where he served at, who the bad guys were. He pointed to, I want to say it was some Japanese military planes. Like once he kind of opened up, and his mom like laid out all these things and was like, so which ones are the good ones, which are the bad ones? Not in terms of like looks, but like aircraft and insignia. Like which one's a good one? And he was like pointing to the Japanese era. He's like, these are bad. I've shot these ones down before. And then, as he aged, obviously he loses it, but there was no way. And he's like, hey, I was on this ship. He named the ship. He named the aircraft carrier. He named the aircraft that he flew. And he even said how he passed. He was like, yeah, I was shot down. I stayed with my plane, and I ended up drowning like in the cockpit.
Man, that's crazy shit, man. That's crazy. I mean, it just goes to show like how innocent kids really are at the age that they haven't been spoiled or brainwashed, right? They're just free thinkers, and they're open to anything. And I think that like if you're open like that and you allow yourself to have extra, I don't want to say extra, but paranormal, right? Like you're just open, like you can now see things, and that's where I think a lot of like what is not best friends, but they're they see things, right?
I was going to say pen pals, and that is definitely not.
It's definitely not pen pal. You know what I'm talking about? Like I don't want to say they're ghost friends, but they're not there.
Just imaginary friends.
Imaginary friends. God damn, why is it that hard? Yeah, imaginary friends, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it is they're actually seeing people, right? Yeah. Like, and that's their actual friend. That's crazy stuff. Yeah. Because I remember growing up, I remember laying in bed at night, and I would have 3 dudes standing at the end of my bed, wearing in like Western wear. Like it was like they were cowboys, right? They never ever said anything, just stood there. But like when you're young, that freaks you the fuck out, right? You see three shadow figures or whatever, but you can see them in great detail wearing cowboy hats and like and that's what it's like. You watch paranormal shows now, and they're like, oh, they're wearing this and that, and you're like, they're in pitch black. How do you see that in the dark? But then I always relate back to that incident when I was growing up, and I'm like, well, I was able to see, their dress and their hat and their facial expressions and shit like that. So I don't know, it was just weird shit. That's the one story from my childhood that I can really remember.
Yeah, and I know I touched on mirrored men, and so if you're not familiar with what mirrored men are, so essentially there's several ways that they've been described or depicted, but essentially they are all wearing the same thing. It's usually like they'll have kind of like a 1940s, 1950s style, like a fedora with like a long trench coat, not like a scary trench coat, but just like one of those like the dress trench coats that you would see kind of in that era. The thing that's crazy about the mirrored men, and there's a few things, but number one is they're completely in sync. So if you see them walking down a road, it's almost like they're in kind of like a military parade or like a military formation where like their left foot's always hitting.
Are they
marching?
So they're not as like rigid, but they are they're in sync, right? So they're all just walking, and all of their mannerisms and everything they do.
So are they typically in pairs, or you use like one?
Three.
Oh, they're in threes.
So
that's like Mark of the Devil, right?
So yeah, so they're in threes. That typically happen with strange weather events. So it's either really hot out, it's really cold out, there's inclement weather. Another thing that they have appeared on is like construction. So around like deforestation or like new builds, new construction. and probably the scariest part of the mirrored men is if you look at them and they acknowledge you, and they always tend to know when you're looking at them. So like if you see them, they will all turn their heads at the same time and look at you. If that happens, and this is a consistent thing throughout, you will have a significant amount of lost time. So, for instance, it's 4 p.m. on a Friday, and you look out your window and there's inclement weather, there's a weather event that's occurring, and they look at you after you notice them. In almost every case, you will come to in the same position that you saw them, but like 8 to 12 hours later.
Weird.
Wow.
Are there any photos of these guys?
Well, just like with everything. No,
yeah, just stories.
So
it sounds very like Mothman-esque, right?
Yeah.
Like the Mothman only shows up before a big disaster, and if you see him, you're kind of
silver.
So, other than the loss of time, is there any other effects to the individual?
No, there's not. I mean, they say it's a pretty emotional event, especially with the lost time, just because you're like, imagine you look at them, and then all of a sudden, like you come to, and you're almost in a trance, and you're like, you're at the window that you have normally, you were like, it was a Friday afternoon. All of a sudden, it's like Saturday morning at like 6 o'clock in the morning.
So I guess my question would be: is have a lot of these experiences, have they been alone? Like there's no one else in their house? Like you know what I'm saying? Like if you were staring out your window, obviously your wife would be like, Adam, what the fuck are you doing?
How many beers have you had?
Exactly. Right. So like, that's what I'm asking is like, is these just like
myself at that point?
very very singular events, or is it typically, if you and I were standing in the house, or if you were standing in the house and I was there and I said you were standing and I could touch you and wake you up out of this like type trance thing.
So I think that a lot of them, there's not a lot of stories of multiple people seeing them and then multiple people having the same time loss. I think how we need to understand that though is what we were just discussing with the whole interdimensional and how
non-human intelligence,
how things occur. It's not it's not necessarily a time loss for anybody else, right? And so they would naturally go about their life, or maybe you are slipped into a different dimension and then you're placed back into the dimension and you don't know what you just did for the 12 hours. And so I think that's probably the better way to understand it is no one around you probably think you're just going about your day or going about your business, probably went to bed early or whatever, what have you. But for you, you don't remember anything about the last 12 hours. You don't remember eating dinner. You don't remember any conversations. All you remember is kind of you slip the dimension and then you're back. And to tie it into a deja vu, maybe you did something when you were, experiencing the time loss event. And then that same event happened, but you weren't really there. But then,
you remember it because you were
right.
Yeah. Dimensional. Once you get beyond 3D, things get real weird fast. And you feel like you need a high level of education to really understand what the hell you're talking about. And somebody explained it to me once of if you were an ant on a sidewalk and a human walked by and cast a shadow on you, you'd be like, why did it just become night? But it's because you don't realize there's an extra dimension taking place,
and I think
which is just a bizarre concept.
We probably had the same story because somebody, I've heard almost that exact same thing. And and then if you've seen Inception.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's like floating because he's sleeping, but he's in a dream. I think I forget which physicist said it was, but he's like, that was almost perfect, like a perfect. It made it approachable. It made it digestible to people that are not.
Remember Interstellar too? They brought in a physicist to explain what that dimension would look like, where he's like floating through the bookshelf.
Exactly right.
Scenario and trying to
He was actually he was like a advisor, like a technical, like a scientific advisor on that. They brought people in and they were like, we want to make this, as realistic as possible, but we also need to make it digestible to like the infantrymen in the room, right? So, but yeah, so absolutely, so amazing so the mirrored men, and these have been around, right? And so even in various subculture, subcommunities within the United States, Appalachia. They've always said, like, if you see three dudes that look exactly the same and they're in step, look away. Like, don't let them see you look at them because
that makes sense.
Because it's not going to be good. So you have the mirrored men, then you have the black-eyed kids. Have you
never heard of
the black-eyed kids?
So, man, lay it on us.
So those are probably more creepy to me than the mirrored men. I mean, they're all creepy, but the black-eyed kids. So they show up at your house. Typically late at night, and they want in your house. Like they will ask you numerous questions about, hey, can we come in? We're lost, or can we come in and use the phone? We need to call our mom, or can we have a ride home? And I've heard of them. So they show up at the front door. They ring the door and they look like just normal kids, but their eyes are completely black.
See, this is more demonic to me than anything because a lot of demonic entities use kids as a way of being able for like someone like us who are parents that would
gain some trust,
gain the trust, take them in, believe everything they have to say, and then next thing you know, you're your kidney's missing and you're in ice in a bathtub.
Yeah, with some you shouldn't have gotten that Russian stripper.
So
Vegas.
what? So I want to make a 180 back to before we started the podcast because I'm curious.
Yeah, I was waiting for an intro to get this,
and I want to hear the story. Adam, you were saying your wife has a Bigfoot story, and I want to hear what it is.
Yeah,
because I want to believe in Bigfoot. I just haven't seen shit that makes me.
So before he starts, and we've talked about this, right? Where people make a mockery of shit, and this is why people don't believe.
Right.
So fucking mountain monsters, right? Yeah. Whatever the fuck that show's called.
Right.
They're out there, Billy Gunn, whatever,
shooting
man.
At each other.
This shit is so stupid, but. Unfortunately, there's people out there buying into it, and this is what makes a mockery of this stuff. So you have stories like what Adam's getting ready to share, which we don't know what it is, but he's getting to share it. So I don't want to. So in maybe in our listeners' minds, like, oh, this would be BS because of all the stuff that's on TV or the mockery that's made of whatever, right? So Just be open-minded is all I'm asking.
It's like what you and I talked about, though, with UFOs. Like 90% of what you read and hear is bullshit. But it's that 10% that makes you want to ask a couple more questions and say, like, what is this real? And especially if you know someone and you can vouch for them and say, they're not going to blow smoke up my ass. Like, yes, it's just a story, but like that also helps lend some credence to the story, to the background, to the entirety of it.
Yeah, and it's just like for me, like when we talked about, I'm a tweener, right? Like I want to believe, but there's a part of me that doesn't, that Bigfoot? I don't want to take it at face value, right? But
yeah,
but it's like stories like this. It's like, okay, I know this guy. I know he's not going to lie to it. I know his wife. She what she saw or what she experienced is going to be true, and that's why. But then I look and I see all these other people who come up with these really weird, outlandish claims, and then I start listening to this, whatever stories. And I know in the back of my mind, I'm like, all right, well, where's the proof? Like,
yeah, but Bigfoot, swamp ape, Yeti, the stories have been around forever.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have a zillion footprints, but the question always comes back to where's the body and where's the biological evidence? And it just always seems to be lacking, or it's anomalous in some manner.
He's a ninja.
Something
straight up ninja. All right,
so let's hear it.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
Yeah. So my wife grew up here in Ohio, in a farming community, and so she lives out on. They had cattle, and then her dad farmed corn, soybeans, just a pretty traditional farmer. Mm-hmm. When she was in high school, so they would put they would camp out or would have a camper, and she had a party in high school, and she was they weren't big drinkers or anything, so we can kind of rule out like any alcohol or any drug that was kind of perpetuating maybe like a any type of story or anything like that. So summertime, and they were out, and I think she was a junior going into her senior year. So for the listeners here in the United States, that is so she's like 17, about to turn 18 years old. So they are in their camper one early summer evening, and it's dark, and they're playing card games. And I think that there was a total of, like 6 or 7 individuals within the camper. And the camper was on, it sat up, so the windows were at about probably I would say 7 feet, probably, to be able to see, essentially to look into the camper window, you would have to either be 7 feet tall or you would have to be standing on something. Mm-hmm. So as they're in there, they look out one of the windows next to the table, and there is a creature that has, as she describes it, extremely hairy in nature, looked like a traditional Bigfoot, but its face was completely white in terms of maybe like the pigmentation of the skin. So it
wasn't all hair.
So the face itself was not hairy. As she described it, it looked more almost like not an orangutan, but like a gorilla face. But it was completely, the pigmentation was white. So as she's told me the story, I've thought like, what a gorilla's face would maybe look like if it had, if it was like an albino, right? So.
And this thing's looking into the camper?
So it's
like just standing there staring?
It's standing, looking into
and so,
fucking creepy.
Knowing Adam, I know he's very inquisitive, so here comes like the 20 questions. Like Adam's just like just zeroing in at this point just to fucking start hammering. Like
let's blow holes in this shit.
I really wish I would have been present for this, because this would have been fucking epic. Because I would have sat back and like cracked my beer. I'm like, oh, it's about to get good.
Yeah.
And it's what's funny about that too is like, when we first started dating, like she'd take me back home. Well, like all these people that were in the camper, would be at social functions, and so I would just be firing questions off, and I was looking for inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Detective Adam at work.
Were the stories all the same?
They were, yeah. So,
Nice. Wow.
So what happened is
Would they pass a polygraph?
I know my wife would.
Well, I know she would. She's a very honest person. So.
What happened when they saw this thing? Like, did they just sit there, or did they run out to like? What did they do?
Yeah. So when they all saw it, well, let me back up. So 2 or 3 of them saw it first, and some of the older or some of the boys were doing something else within the camper, and the girls were like, "Hey, there's somebody or there's something outside." And at that point, it had not disappeared, but it had like moved away from the window. And how she tells it is when it moved away from the window, they didn't know where it went. But they told the boys who, they're, 17-year-old boys around pretty girls. They want to fucking get all yoked up and think they're tough guys. And so as the story goes, is a couple of them opened the door and started yelling because they thought it was somebody in a mask or they thought somebody was fucking with them.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
And when they opened the door, the thing was like in the wood line, probably 50 meters away from the opening of the camper door. When one of the boys, the most like alpha, right, in quotes, boys, yelled out like, "Hey," whatever. My wife says that this thing closed that 50-meter distance in like 2 seconds.
Towards them?
Towards them.
Wow.
Closed it, and then,
Think about the stride on that to close that.
What did you, 50 or 150?
50 meters.
Okay.
In just a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about that. So your average, I'm 6'2", you're 6'3". Mm-hmm. So what?
3 feet a step?
3 feet a step, 50 meters within.
But if his face is looking in a 7-foot tall window, you're up there.
Yeah, I mean, that's
So what the tough guy do? Did he run out after? Or did he shut the door?
No, he bitched out.
He had to bitch out.
He bitched out.
He closed the door.
Yeah, he bitched out.
And locked it.
I knew it.
Yeah, they closed the door, they locked it, and they didn't sleep a wink. Like the rest of the night, they were too scared to go up to the house, so they stayed in the camper. No one slept a wink. They stayed in the camper until like 7:30 when the sun came up, 6:30 in the morning. Went up to the house, and they all racked out. But they said they didn't sleep a wink, and they were not about to go up to that. And the house was only like 100 meters away, but they weren't going to go outside of the camper to run, into the house. And so that alone is telling, because you have, a group of people, if they truly thought that it was like their brother or their brother's friends, right, or whatever, because she has 2 older brothers. One was out of high school. The other one, I think, was 1 year out of high school. So they were like, 19, 20-year-olds, And so if you truly believed that, they're not actually in physical danger, that you could make it up to the house and you're that scared. So they tell the story.
Hold on, just real quick, backing up. So this thing's closing the gap. You said the face was white. It kind of looked Bigfoot. What did the tough guy describe this thing as when it started coming at him?
They described it as it looked like it was floating. It's tough because they didn't see the legs like running. They said the head wasn't bobbing like it was running. It was just so fluid, and it closed the distance so quickly. It was like it was moving like it was floating.
So it necessarily could have been something other than, it could have been something paranormal.
Yeah, and I'll circle back to one detail about their, kind of where they live and what their property is. But so they fall asleep. They're asking their brother or her brother's friends. They will deny it. They go to school. So summer continues. Jackie is basically saying like, hey, at some point, like this isn't going to make, like the secret isn't going to make it for like the rest of, our high school career. Someone's going to say like, hey, that was us. We were just fucking with you. And as kind of the legend and the lore grew, she figured that was, that was imminent, that truth coming out was imminent. So never did. even graduation, they all moved away. It's still to this day a topic of conversation when we all get together. Not one person has said, "Hey, it's me." And we've gone through. I mean, that's been 20 years ago, right? So,
yeah, I was just going to ask you what the time frame was on this. So over 20 years, they all have the same.
Yeah, this was June 2004, and here we are, June 2024, and not one person has owned up, not
deviated,
and there's not even a reason. There's life has hit all of us. There's been happy times, there's been tragedy, there's been sadness, there's been joyous occasions, and there has never one inkling of anybody saying like, hey, that was actually us. Like we've.
I guess real quick before you ask your question, Brad, I'm sorry to cut you off, but so Adam, you're in the military, you're an infantry guy, I'm an infantry guy. We've been out in the woods in some really weird places, right? And we've been in fighting positions, and we always think that we either see or hear something out there, right? Because we're on alert,
yes,
whatever. But it's different. I think even camping can be fucking scary. Like if you're out in the middle of somewhere, you're like, even if you're not even like, you just pitch a tent out somewhere and right, you're camping. If you're not familiar with that area, or even if you are, it can be scary at night. Mm-hmm. So then you add another level onto, because I think your senses might be elevated a little bit, but for how many people was there? You say?
I believe it was 7.
7 people. Oh, it's the 7.
What's significant about 7?
Travis Walton had 7 people.
Travis Walton's full of fucking shit.
He is full of shit.
Whatever.
I know his wife's not full of shit, but I'm just saying it's just like a 7 number.
What about evidence around the camper? Footsteps, prints on the camper, shit in the woods, anything on that front?
Perfect. Yeah. So it had been raining, and they brought that into account. There was no footprints in kind of the dew-soaked grass. I mean, obviously this happened prior to the dew actually occurring, early morning, but they didn't find anything. They didn't find any feces. I do not remember if there was a smell, and I can get into a little bit of like some of the indicators of,
the skunk ape stuff.
You got the skunky, but you also have,
it smells like one of those things that just can trip your trigger really quick.
Yeah. So none of that, and that's and even to her point too, like if it was someone fucking with them, there would have been
footprints.
Outside and around.
Interesting.
And also to her point, that's not going to stay a secret for a while, because if they're still in school, Joe Schmo's going to go that weekend, that week, like, hey, I was out there fucking with, so and so. They were out in this camper in the middle of the woods, and we scared the fuck out of them type thing, right? So, yeah, I have now, but it makes sense that there wouldn't be any footprints or any type of marks in the grass if they described it as it was like floating or just hovering, right? I mean, that would make sense. That's why I'm thinking, like, is it more paranormal than a Yeti, Bigfoot, whatever.
Well, Adam, you were about to talk about some kind of property history, and I'm sure that probably goes into something about what this may or may not be, maybe.
Indian burial.
Well, so the more, and recently there's just been a lot more kind of correlation with UFO activity related to kind of the Bigfoot activity. But before I touch on that, so BFRO, which is Bigfoot Field Research Organization. Right. So they log everything, if you're familiar with that website. But in Ohio, and you can filter through, but in Ohio to date has 323 reports of a Bigfoot sighting. And then if you click on that website's great because you can go by county and they do descriptions, descriptive, notes and details about the actual sighting itself. But that area is it has a lot on that website because of A, how rural it is, but B, there's a lot of cattle farming that occurs. And they say that's what one of the indicators is especially in agricultural, where you have, kind of the smell, like the chicken pens or, the beef cattle or whatever. But this was not the first kind of weird thing that had happened. My wife talks about 2 UFO situations that the whole family experienced when they were up there.
So before you get into that, though, when you're talking about cattle and stuff like that, did they have any type of experiences where there was just random cattle deceased?
So no cattle mutilations, nothing like that, like you would see from like a Skinwalker Ranch or like a, anything like that. But the few things that they did see is they just saw weird lights down their lane. One of the homes that sits kind of adjacent and across the field to them was like lit up one night by a craft. And again, like her memory isn't great on it because it's when she was a girl, so probably like 8 years old.
So when you talk about lit up, like you're talking about like a spotlight down, or are you talking about like orbs?
Yeah, 100% like the traditional, like what you would see with something like downlighting the house.
Huh.
And my father-in-law Tony, so as I mentioned, he's a farmer, and so a lot of what farmers have to do is they will farm all night long,
Past crack of dawn. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
and he'll be out there at 3:00 in the morning. And he's like, I've just seen some really weird shit out there. He's like, but I always would attribute it to like, it's harvest season. And he's like,
3:00 in the morning, and I'll stay up.
Yeah,
there.
he's like,
Which is great because I
Being
just had this
delusional.
conversation with a farmer buddy of mine yesterday. I'm like, hey man, when you're out harvesting, because soybeans you can only do so long, but corn you can harvest all night. So it was like one of those questions, like, hey, like when you've been out harvesting corn, which is all night, he's like, well, you're always seeing weird lights, but you never know if it's like a satellite or if it's a plane or are you actually seeing something weird, right? So but we had that conversation yesterday, which is weird that he brought that up. So it's cool.
So do you think they're Bigfoot and UFOs are those corroborated in your mind somehow and interlinked?
I think they're correlative. Because I always thought of it as, one thing that I always looked at kind of like from the objective way of thinking and logic, right, and reasoning, was the biologics. The biologics for me was huge because I'm a deer hunter. I've been out in the woods a lot. I can tell when a deer's been through there. I can tell when other animals have been through there. Scat, prints, and then also sheds. Like you can go out and actual shed hunt because of the biologics, and then you can also see, when animals are old or whatever happens to them, or coyotes got them. You can see those biologics very easily.
I just got a nice shed when I was out baling hay last week.
Yeah,
I would like to have seen this buck during bow season. That was a nice 8-point. Yeah, it's fucking nice.
Yeah.
So do you think the Bigfoots aren't biologics and there's something else then? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. I think that they are. I think that there's a correlation with increased UFO activity and kind of, and again, going back to the whole planes and the dimensions, and being able to, and who's to say there isn't some type of photographic implication to an interdimensional being, right? So, if you slip the dimension, normal technology, one could say, is not applied to you in another dimension. So your senses work, right? Your 5 senses work, but say you tried to, and I equate it to this: if I were to slip a dimension and try to text back or use some type of technology, it's not going to work, right? So I could slip back to 1963. I don't know if you've seen that film about just kind of it has James Franco in it, but he's basically trying to stop the Kennedy assassination, but he keeps slipping back and replaying the day, and he keeps manipulating. It's a very butterfly effect type
Or like
story.
Groundhog Day-ish.
Yeah, but everything that he's doing, is having kind of the butterfly effect down the road. And so when he finally gets back to the early 2000s, after he successfully stops the assassination of Kennedy, the world he comes back to is unrecognizable to him,
Right.
Because we ended up going to war. We had a Cold War and a nuclear.
Yeah.
Well, so for our listeners, describe the butterfly effect.
So the butterfly effect is kind of the concept of if you change, and at its base level, a butterfly flaps its wings in Southern California, which causes dust particles to spit up, which causes a dog to smell the dust and sneeze, which scares the driver of a vehicle because he sees a dog sneeze on the side of the road and he hits, it distracts him and he hits a vehicle that the person that he hit kills that person who actually was going to cure cancer. So cancer is not cured.
Very final destination.
And so this is where when we were talking about time travel, it kind of gets a little scary, right? So, if time travel were a thing, and there's people out there that believe it actually is, because there is photos of people.
We know we can slow it down.
Right, but there's people but there's photos of people in pictures that are wearing dress that does not fit that time. So does time travel actually exist? But if there was time travel, like one thing, whether you see yourself or you change that one little thing about can like that ripple effect, butterfly effect, whatever can completely change, your path in life. I think that's kind of, I find it kind of scary, actually.
Taking a step back, one of the things you said, it's interesting. You were talking about kind of like phasing in and phasing out. There's this dude, and I think he's interesting, but I don't buy it. But there's enough video evidence that makes me want to research it further. There's this medical guy. His name is Stephen Greer, and he was a medical doctor. Mm-hmm. And now he's got this research group. They do meetings, and they sit in an area, and they do this deep meditation. And they'll shoot laser pointers in the sky, and sometimes UFOs will show up. And they have videos showing this big group of people sitting around, and they're kind of tracking. But he has this one photo, and it was really weird. And he was describing the experience where this being, he communicated telepathically with this being, and this being came down. And you have this photo, and the way that he describes it makes sense from the photo was they were kind of in and out of whatever dimension we were in, where you could see them for kind of a split second, then they're out, then they're back in, and like they're phasing in and phasing out. So that whole concept of like dimensional reality, kind of what you were talking about, like, I don't know, maybe that's kind of real. There's Einstein theorized that it existed, so maybe it does, and we're just not smart enough to have figured it out yet.
We're the dum-dums.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too. So the remote viewing, if you've heard of
super interesting, right?
Yeah,
and some government spending towards it. Absolutely. So is there
the men who stare at goats? It was what's the guy's name? He was in The Peacemaker. He was on ER. Clooney, George Clooney. He was in a movie in the 90s called The Men Who Stare at Goats. But that was a government and military program, and they were successful on being able to remote view some Soviet locations, military installations.
So that was an actual program.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Explain what remote viewing is in case people don't understand.
So remote viewing is essentially people that are kind of more in tune to. I wouldn't call them empaths, but it's almost like more in tune with some like a psychic, like some psychic abilities to where they can put themselves in a state of mind given very little information and be able to essentially see things around the world.
Like a medium.
They are geographically located. Well, a medium,
not like a medium, because
a medium is more
you're interacting with something.
Yeah,
the remote viewing is you telepathically take yourself out of your body. If I give you a map with a waypoint on the map and I see where that's located, I can have an out of body experience to fly to that place and see what's at that location.
Gotcha.
So
I'm tracking.
probably one of the most famous kind of cases of remote viewing was a Soviet defense structure, and they gave them they didn't give them a lot of information, but they said, hey, just draw what you see. Now they had
I remember hearing about something about that.
They had
keep going. Yeah,
reconnaissance photos from whether it was the U-2 or whatever, but the reconnaissance photos already had confirmed what was there, but they needed to confirm that this individual could actually was successful in the remote viewing. And so essentially they went in and it was he or a she, I forget which one, but they straight up drew exactly what the reconnaissance photos had showed, that basically what the Soviets were doing. I think it was like a nuclear defense structure or something.
I don't remember if I watched a documentary on that, or I do remember hearing that exact, either reading about it or listening or watching something on that exact thing. And it's very fascinating.
What's interesting about a lot of the remote viewers that have been used by the government is they meet strange and untimely deaths.
Well, I mean, come on. Training accidents.
Well, you and I have talked a lot about training.
They
talked about
they got suicided.
Yeah.
Adam, what's your thoughts of training accidents?
It's one of those things where you have to go in with a understanding. I know that's not always easy, but you have to go when you start going into, especially working for the government, really any government, right? You have to understand that, like, you're going to be told some things and you're going to have to live your life. And you guys, in your previous podcast, you talked about some individuals that, if the government doesn't want you talking, or that it don't want you revealing certain things that, you've been read in on, it's a very,
What do you think? I can't just not take that lead in right out of the gates. What's your take on Bob Lazar? I mean, that's like the number one suspect on all this. He seems like the quintessential dude to just throw rocks at and call bullshit, but at the same time, flight characteristics of UAPs are there. Element 115's there. The compartmentalization fits with what David Grush said in his congressional testimony. Do you think Bob Lazar is full of shit, or you think there's actually something there?
Yeah, you think it's plausible?
Yeah, I'm a Lazar fan. I don't think that there is anything to gain from subjecting yourself to the types of things that he's had to go through throughout his entire life to continue. It's not like he's benefiting significantly on the financial side of the house. And the government has made it extremely difficult to live, whether that's tanking his credit score, whether that is
IRS audits.
How many times has his trinket shop been raided by the FBI?
And so, it's one of those things where the government is like exposing. They're giving him credence.
Absolutely.
And his story credence by the type of attention that
absolutely. And that's what the point I was trying to get is, like, when you get close to something, like, okay, so when we were talking about Fravor and Graves, right? Months before anybody even talked to them, and they had it recorded. And I think that was like deniable plausibility from the government. It was like, okay, well, we released this video, it's going to go away. But then you think of Lazar, he was getting close to something, and so the government, may or may not have started bringing shit. And then you got Grush, who brought the whistleblower, brought testimony, and then he's getting shit in the mail saying, hey, we can get you whenever we want you. He quit his job. He was getting blowback. Even though he's under whistleblower protection, he was still getting some blowback from that.
They made it clear they could touch him at any time. What's interesting with Lazar is he's alluded to and never said, but I hear a lot about it, and where there's smoke, there's probably fire, that he took some element 115. And I remember hearing that there is gas chamber video showing Bob shooting a laser into this smoke chamber, and the smoke chamber bending the laser around element 115 because it's gravitational or anti-gravitational. And I'm sure if that is factual, then that is why the government is just constantly raiding him. Like, if this son of a bitch has this, we want it back, and you can't do anything with it.
It almost, we can go into, like, if you remember the guy who, I don't remember his name, but made a vehicle run on water, and then he just disappeared. Yep. He had a meeting with some government officials, and after that meeting, he just vanished.
Yep.
Right. So without, you can get tap water, run your
cracking water for hydrogen. It's a hydrogen car.
Absolutely.
Like, Bob talked about how to do that.
Yeah,
that was the original jet engine Honda guy.
Right,
like,
but
how do you make shit go fast for cheap?
Right, that's what I'm saying. So now you're cutting out the oil industry, right? You're cutting all these
big players.
Yeah, so now you can go into all kinds of different conspiracy theories around all this stuff. So,
and there's
a different podcast, but
and those are all of those things, and what the government has done. That is, that is a precedent that they have already set when we talk about like legalization of marijuana and the entire reason why marijuana and the hemp plant, essentially got blacklisted like it did, and then federal, legislation making it a Schedule 1. Like the government has been doing that for many years, and just making sure that they're, kind of the way with which the government is operating, and the coal industry and the jobs, and we can go back, different podcasts, but the cancer treatments and big pharma.
I believe that there's actually a cure for cancer, but they're just not releasing it.
Whatever the economic impacts of the medical industry in the United States, and the donor and big pharma donors and all kinds of political shit that occurs, there's a reason why people are, in my opinion, being kept sick is because of the amount of money and all the insurance companies, and everything is just wrapped up into,
I'm turning into a conspiracy theorist, so I'm right on board with you.
Yeah.
If anything, like, all right, so if you guys remember, listeners remember when Brian and I started this podcast, it started just him and I drinking beer one night and decided, hey, let's do a podcast. And, he was into extraterrestrial stuff. I really wasn't, but then we started talking conspiracy theorists, whatever. And I really wasn't a conspiracy theorist, but now as we start getting through some of these episodes, I think I'm starting to turn into a tweener when it comes to conspiracy theorists as well, man.
It's interesting when you get into big business where you're talking billions and billions of dollars, whether it's big pharma or big defense contractors, there is so much money and employment on the line. Like, you would probably do a lot of different things to make sure that what you need is still available to you. And you could take that out of scope any way you want with either cancer treatment drugs, or if you do have recovered craft and you're reverse engineering things, is that fiber optics? Is that stealth technology? Is that, whatever? Are these companies really inventing shit, or are they just taking stuff apart that already exists and figuring out how to make it work?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of both, but then you throw in the lobbyists, right? And so that's what you're talking about. You got lobbyists that are in DC, and they're, they got some pull, right? And I think that's where it comes down to what gets squashed and what doesn't. And that's really what's sad about some of those things we're talking about is transparency, and what should be transparent and what shouldn't be. And I'm on board 100% that don't be transparent if it's going to jeopardize national security. I'm 100% on that, right? But what we talked about before in some of our podcasts is if our military men or even our civilians are in danger, that's where we should be a little bit more transparent.
I think this comes back to, and we talked about it last time, but like the UAP legislation that Grush helped author is getting blocked, and one of the people blocking it is funded by Lockheed Martin. And to your point, I don't want to give away any government secrets, but at the same time, it's like, and we talked about it last time, you don't stop teaching nuclear physics because everyone's going to go out and make a bomb. You talk about what it is and what the good can do, and you don't talk about that compartment of it. If we have materials that are otherworldly that could do whatever for us, why wouldn't you involve science and have research done? And Bob talks about that too. It's the only way to advance. Put a team of people together with different backgrounds, talk about it. What are the things we can do, and whatever, to advance the science. But it's so compartmentalized that we just stay stagnant.
Well, I mean, if you start talking about government and lobbyists and stuff like that, like we were talking about cancer treatment, population control, man. Like, we only have so much room for so many people. Cancer kills how many people per year? Why would we want to have a cure for that? Like, that's population control. We know that X amount of people are going to die each year. That's kind of keeping this, checks and balances where it needs to be. So I don't know, man. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think strategically thinking about.
Man, this is like a 3-beer episode right now. This is good. I like this. This is good.
I think strategically letting the world know about, recovering of craft or biologics or anything, it totally changes the shape of what the status quo has been for the last.
It's pedestal smashing from a religious standpoint,
Everything,
from a
exactly.
you're not protected. Everything.
So everything is now open to where, nationalism and politics and all the things that we quabble about on a daily basis
Totally irrelevant.
is gone because, and not to use kind of a cheeky movie scene, but that scene in Independence Day where the president like stands up and it's like, this is a humankind issue. This isn't a United States issue. Oh. And you see the Kuwait military has jets and the French have jets and they're all scrambling and we're all working together as one. But I think that the failure to release these things and what Gresh said on kind of the agreements between the world leaders and these beings of like, hey,
bipartisan agreement.
This is what needs to happen. We can't let this out because the structure as we know it from kind of a strategic perspective and everything that we know as human beings will crumble because, there's so much patriotism and nationalism throughout the world that, at the end of the day, a lot of people hang their hats on the fact, well, we're Americans,
right? We're superior,
we're this, or
etc.
I'm British and I'm this,
right?
Well, when that happens, everything melts away. It's completely melted away, and then all of a sudden you have a world where everybody doesn't have an anchor to buoy to, right?
Yeah, and we talked about that, especially when you're talking about, I think it was Fravor when they were actively jamming our radar systems, right? Which I didn't know at the time, but that's an act of war. So you have this extraterrestrial vehicle, UAP, whatever you want to call it, actively jamming our systems. So that leads me to believe that if they wanted to wipe us out, they absolutely could, and there's nothing that we could do about it because, one, we just now recently started being able to track them. They can jam our shit, and they can go to our waypoints and wait on us.
Well, it's interesting.
Within seconds.
We're crossing geopolitical boundaries, and we talked about it last time. The 1974 treaty between the USSR and the U.S., talking about nuclear holdbacks, discusses UAPs near nuclear weapon sites. Get out of here. We hated one another. Why do we come together to focus on something like that? That's a super weird section of a treaty for two countries that hate each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird.
It's weird.
It's definitely weird.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where it's truly, I don't think.
What do they call that? Frenemies? Where you're like your enemies, but you're kind of friends in the back line. You have to make it appear that we're enemies, but we still work together closely on certain things behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, that happens. I mean, that's just.
Oh, absolutely.
That is just such a, like 2020.
We have stories, but we're not going to get into it. But I think where you're going with this. Maybe
for anybody paying taxes, it's terrible to have the thought that your government can't protect you against everyone. Right? I mean, that's the thing. And that's what makes me think disclosure can't happen because either we're in cahoots with whatever this is or we're not. But either way, we can't protect ourselves against them because they're so advanced.
I think it might be a combination of all. I think we're in cahoots with said extraterrestrial because we know that we're not as advanced as we want to be. However, I also think that they may share some of their technology with us, and that's how we advance our stuff.
An exchange program.
And I think that's how because you remember, right, when we were talking, and I think it was either Fravor or
Graves,
we updated our radar technology, and now all of a sudden we're able to start seeing them. So did they share something with us that, or are we just that intelligent where we were able to?
I don't think that was probably it, because that was just Graves talking about updating to the APG-79 radar. That's when all that shit showed up on the screen.
The SAS screen, or is it just their normal radar?
That was the normal radar, from what I understand.
So I guess I'd be curious to know, so one was 2004, the other was 2014, right?
Right.
So in 2004, which would have been the East Coast or West Coast?
That Fravor was West Coast, off 60 miles.
So 2004 was West Coast, so it was Graves,
Yeah.
right? So, but their radar on their airplanes, fighters, they were able to detect them, right?
Well, and keep in mind, in Fravor, they were coming from 80,000 feet down to sea level.
Right.
And then back up. It was up and down. The East Coast ones are flying around, right? Remember Graves talking about flying racetrack formations and different things.
But that was when the radar was updated. It was 10 years later.
Well, I'm sure there were probably multiple updates between 2004 and 2014.
I was just trying to see if there was any type of correlation between like the updates,
Whatever
and
system we used.
right, or when we could or could not see them, and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been a great discussion, but Brian actually had a paranormal experience that I think would be fitting for all this stuff. Adam, what do you think?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's get after it. Let's hear it. I want to hear your paranormal experience. Let's let all the listeners hear this shit, because this is actually good. This is like when I think of paranormal, this is where I go to, and it's, to me, this isn't unbelievable. This is, to me, like something that is like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just weird, right?
And that's a lot of paranormal stuff. I'm getting like goosebumps just because I know the story, but getting goosebumps just waiting for you to tell the story.
So we're probably talking like 2010 time frame. I had been hired to do an asbestos evaluation job as part of a VA hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. There were, I think it was like 13 officers' quarters homes that were all built in the early 1800s that were being renovated. And the company that I worked for got hired to do this investigation. We were on federal ground, so we would notify the VA police staff, and then we would also notify the local city of Fort Thomas police staff. I showed up at the house with my partner. My partner, John, was like, I don't know, probably a solid 340 pounds and played left tackle for the Jets and Falcons. An enormous human being. We get to the site. He had to use the bathroom. All the water to these homes had been shut off. They'd been pillaged for copper from looters.
So the water's been turned off, but was there any like
electricity was still going, and the homes were kind of in a state of disrepair, but like woodwork, specifically tile. I remember Rookwood tile was popular in Cincinnati, and all the interiors of these were Rookwood tile,
but like
pretty high end finishes.
But when we're talking about like the interior, was there any like? Obviously, the water was shut off, so there wasn't any water leaks. There's no rain getting in, or is it like?
Oh no, there's definitely rain getting in, and there's definitely water leaks.
Right,
like
cool.
they're in a state of disrepair.
Got it.
Like the whole reason we were doing the inspection is I don't know if the VA was investing money or the city or something. They wanted to rehab them and turn them into condos. So we were there to do an inspection pre-demolition renovation. So we show up. My friend John wants to use the bathroom, so he goes up to the VA hospital. He's like, "You go ahead and get started." I walk in. I have my toolbox. I'm getting paperwork sorted out and different things, and I just hear the only way I can describe it is like somebody taking their hand and smack it against the wall. And it was like super sporadic, and I stopped what I was doing and I started listening. I was like, "Son of a bitch, there is like some kind of vagrant up in the attic doing some kind of bullshit." And this was at a point in time. This probably close to me having, I'm sure I had a cell phone. Maybe I didn't have it on me. I don't know. I didn't call anyone. I just waited for John to come back. So I hear this just like slapping noise every, call it 45 seconds, this slap. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? John shows up and I was like, hey, we need to notify the VA police. I'm pretty sure we have somebody like some vagrant sitting upstairs, probably looting copper, doing whatever. And he's like, fuck that, dude. He's like, just grab a hammer out of your toolbox. We'll go and run him out. And I was like, oh, fuck it. You play left tackle. Like, you lead the way. He's like, I'm slow. You go first. I'm like, motherfucker. So I start up the stairs, and I got this hammer cocked, just ready to swing at anything that moves, you know. And I start up the stairs, and it's all plaster and lath. And there was plaster falling off the floor. So that slapping sound I was hearing was the plaster falling off the ceiling and just smacking on the floor.
All right, so you were able to debunk
Yeah, we debunked it, and then I got a massive amount of shit from John about you know, pull your shit together, be a big boy here.
Yeah.
And I'm looking in the bathroom because there was a hole in the ceiling. That's why the plaster was falling through, and I see footprints in the water, and I pull him in. I was like, "Look, motherfucker, I'm telling you, somebody's up here." And he, no sooner did he walk over and see that, and we heard somebody, just footsteps straight down the stairs. And there were two sets of stairs. There was like I think they called them like the butler stairs in the back, and then there were like the showcasey stairs in the front. And these went down the butler stairs in the back, like 15 feet away from where we were standing.
Definitely an officer's house.
And I was like,
I agree.
I was like, John looked at me and he was like, all right, maybe you're right. Let's go get the VA police. And I was like, thank you. So we go downstairs. I collect my handful of samples that I got, my paperwork. I walk out the back door. This housing development set up such that it's kind of like a teardrop, with the point of the teardrop being the entry point and then the outside kind of wrapping around the Ohio River. It was a beautiful overlook, like primo property. But I see these 6 police cars with their lights on. And right as I'm about ready to open the back door, I was like, what the fuck is going on? In my head, I'm like, somebody got out of jail, and I bet somebody was in this fucking house, and they're like looking for whoever this person is. I opened the door. Officers from the side of the house and then from behind the garage, guns drawn, drop what you have in your hands. And I'm like ready to have a fucking heart attack about this, whatever I'm experiencing. And then I got guns on me. So
you done shit your pants.
I dropped my shit, and we explained the situation. I'm like, I'm actually happy you guys are here. Explain what I had been hearing, which I thought was the plaster, but then the footprints in the water, like the running down the stairs. They had the house surrounded for, they said, about 5 minutes waiting for us to come out. And they went in and cleared the house and didn't find shit.
I do find it interesting that they're just like, you know what? We know there's 2 dudes in there. Fuck it. They'll come out.
Yeah.
Let's just hang outside here.
Super weird. I'll never forget it.
For them to come out
from
here.
both sides of the back and then both sides of the garage.
I was just going to say, well played.
And what's interesting, and the reason that actually shook out the way that it was is because the way that we had it set up is we would notify the VA police, and then the VA would notify the city police. Well, it's a popular place to come walk because it's got this beautiful river view. So some civilian was walking through, saw this tall, skinny white dude and this huge black dude, and they're like, oh, somebody's stealing copper, and called the city of Fort Thomas police. VA never notified them. That's why they showed up. There's no communication between groups. So
deconfliction.
Yeah.
So, but when the police did show up and they went and searched, they didn't find anything. Did they see the footprints?
You know, I don't really remember anymore. I don't remember conversation after that. I think I was too, like, after having the guns on me, I was too shook up. I don't really recall all that stuff. I remember John giving me a bunch of shit when he showed up and basically telling me I was a bitch until he saw the footprints, right?
Which I can see that. He's just like, pull yourself together, man.
Yeah.
You are a man.
Yeah.
We will check this shit out.
You go first. Be a man, you first. Take the hammer.
I do love that the biggest guy was just like, you know what?
Dude.
You be the point man.
If somebody had peeked their head around the corner, they would have taken a hammer to the face because I was just ready. Like, I didn't know what I was walking into.
Look at you, big guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the paranormal story. So I don't know what it was. I 100%, I never saw anything other than footprints in the water, but I 100% heard somebody run down the stairs, and that freaked me the fuck out.
I mean, the footprints in the water, man. That's the crazy thing about that. Like, honestly, like obviously the footsteps going down the stairs is one thing, but physically seeing the footprints in the water,
and there was no water on the stairs,
which is creepy.
Yeah, I just heard just like a standard like just running down.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff right there.
And what material was the stairs? Just like they were like wood with. Like,
oh man, that's a really good question. The fancy stairs, which is not where I heard the footprints, were all wood. I don't remember what the Butler stairs in the back were. They were probably wood. I don't really recall anymore.
Butler stairs, fucking plywood, something cheap.
Yeah,
not something the general population can't see. Yeah.
They did say. I do remember them when they cleared the building. They said in the attic they'd found Burger King bags. So somebody at some point was squatting in there.
Okay. Yeah, but the thing was, the police were already surrounding. Right at that point,
couldn't have got out.
They would have seen that they were
right.
You know, creeping out the side door, back door, whatever. I mean, obviously they were there. They caught you guys walking out.
Yeah, they definitely caught us.
So
Definitely had you. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Those old homes.
They'll get you.
You never know. I have kind of a similar story down at the University of Dayton. I was just down there partying, just like on Kefauver. I went down there. So a restroom was down the stairs, and then the main floor had one. But obviously, like at a house party in college, the one restroom upstairs gets pretty packed. So I'd always use the downstairs and would walk down there. And one night, just going to the restroom, and the light just starts, flickering on me, and I'm like, well, let's see. And so I go over and I make sure it's, completely
Screwed in.
right? And it is. And it was just flickering on me. And then later that night, I had ended up staying. One of my buddies lived in the house, and I stayed on that main floor. And he had six roommates. And it was a Friday night, and the party had stopped. This is 3:00 in the morning, and as I'm laying on the couch on the main floor, I hear the back door swing open, hit the wall, and then shut, and hear the deadbolt lock. And it was so clear and vivid that I didn't think anything of it. And then I hear, steps through the kitchen to the threshold of the room that I'm sleeping, and I'm like, yeah, like someone's just gonna walk through here and go up the stairs. Maybe they were out late, or maybe they're at the library studying. I had no idea, but it was such a natural sound that I was like,
Didn't think anything of it.
Yeah, this is normal.
And no one walked. You had to walk past my couch to get up to the stairs. And the next morning, I asked him about it, and he's like, no, he's like, we deadbolted that lock like before we went to bed. And all the roommates were home, like they all went to bed. And somebody just came in and unlocked the door, walked to the threshold of the kitchen.
Oh.
And I was
Crazy stuff, man.
like, hey.
Like, so when we talk, like, I believe paranormal over extraterrestrial. Obviously that's how this podcast kind of started, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why we're talking, it's an extraterrestrial UAP, UFO, but also paranormal. So I believe in the paranormal stuff. And I've had my own experiences, and I've told you both in the past of a paranormal experience. So working one night, third shift, I was an LE guy back in the day, and we would get the same alarm drop every night, and we'd always find the same door unlocked, go in, search the building, but there was always this one level of this building, and it literally looked like someone from the 1950s, 1960s just one day just vanished. I'm talking table set, everything, like the colors, like the old, kind of I don't know, 1950s, 1960s, everything was just perfect. But there was dust everywhere, So anyway, so one night I was like, I talked to the guy I was working with. I was like, listen, man, I'm taking a voice recorder with me tonight because I know we're going to get the alarm drop and we're just going to go. So imagine that. The alarm goes off. We go, him and I go. And it was me and two other officers, and we start walking. So I turn the voice recorder on, and we're walking. You can hear us walking, our footsteps. You hear us talking. And I asked a question, like, what is this place? I wonder what this place was or something like that. I think I still have the recording. I'll have to play that one night for one of our podcasts later. But I was like, what is this place? And so we just clear the building. No one's in there. Secure the back door. We're out. So I get back to the PD and I plug in the voice recorder, and you hear us tromping, and all of a sudden out of nowhere you hear hospital, dude. But it was right after I said, what is this place anyway, or something like that. And you hear hospital. Dude, freak me the fuck out. Yeah. All right. And I mean, it's one of those things, like when you capture an EVP, I mean, it's crazy to actually think that you caught some type of paranormal phenomenon, right? So I did some research on that specific building. That building was actually a hospital way back when, but they also did back alley abortions there. All right. So there's a lot of like positive and negative stuff going on at that certain building, but it was crazy shit. Like I wasn't expecting it. I just thought it was like, whatever.
Pretty cool.
It's cool. Yeah, it was absolutely cool, but it was also, damn.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Like, what do you think about after that? Like, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like you just hear that because you can watch all the different paranormal shows on TV that you want, and you hear them gather EVPs. It's one thing to watch it on TV, but to get one in person is a completely different feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, just after one of our podcasts, I told you. So when I have one of our podcasts, I stand in my garage, just sitting there, smoking and going through my phone. And I just felt somebody who was fucking watching me. And out of the corner of my eyes, saw like a figure. And I look over and it was like, in a corner of my eye, I could see it, but it was gone. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm just kind of imagining shit. And I'm just doing my thing. And all of a sudden, I still felt someone was watching me. And I look over, and it was in the back corner of my fucking garage at that point, a shadow figure. And it didn't move. And I actually was like looking at it, and it just fucking disappeared. So, I mean, I don't know how many garage beers we had that night, but it wasn't enough for me to start seeing shadow figures. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Right. Creeper. Yeah,
Crazy
super
stuff.
creepy.
So I don't know, fellas, this was a great podcast. You guys want to end it there, or you want to keep going?
Yeah. Let's wrap her up.
All right, Adam, we really do appreciate you coming on tonight.
Absolutely.
I know it was last minute. Like I said, our episodes kind of got messed up there, but we do appreciate you coming on. I think this was a great evening, just chatting, talking about weird stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully I can make another appearance here, and we'll continue to chat. There's a lot of other things that I'd love to talk about. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm sure we'll
Love to
have you
back.
I'm sure we'll have you back on.
Keep your mind open, your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.